Hello everybody, what is up? Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to a video that I am so excited about. I've been planning it for a while. What are my curtain bangs doing? They literally have a mind of their own right now. Accumulating all of my tips and tricks for you guys. And today we're going to talk all about traveling on a budget, how to travel on a budget, tips and tricks that I have, and all that jazz. You guys know first of all, if you guys are new here, hi, hello, my name is Carter. I talk all about getting through life in your 20s unfiltered. And some of my biggest passions in life are personal finance, but also traveling. And I feel like one of my missions here on YouTube is to show that you can travel on a budget, take a weekend trip, and really make the most of it, because it's one, about who you're with, or if you're on a solo trip, it's all about spending time with yourself, but also you can have so much fun on a budget, and there's so many like inexpensive and free things to do on trips, and I just like love showcasing that in our travel videos, and really realizing that we all have different money priorities when it comes to travel, and we're all going to prioritize different things. So I'm going to split this video up into a few parts. It's just going to be kind of like tips and tricks that I have. Then we're going to kind of go through the process of planning like a fake trip together so you guys can see how I do it, because I personally am a very visual person, and so I like seeing people do things. And then third, we are going to go through my budget spreadsheet that I have for travel so you guys can kind of see how we budget it out. So grab a drink, grab a coffee, a tea, a glass of wine if it's the evening. We're just going to hang out, pretend we're in a coffee shop, you know, chatting about trips, and I'm giving you all of my tips and tricks, and I'm so excited. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first tip that I have for you is to determine your travel style. And let's say you're going on a trip with your partner. Since I do a lot of my traveling with Matt, my boyfriend, I think it's really important to sit down when planning a trip, get the vibe for the trip, and if it's, let's say, one of your first few trips with your partner or friend, figure out where their priorities lie. It's important when it comes to budgeting for a trip to just kind of know where you want to put your money, and every trip is going to be different. You know, you don't even need to figure out your general travel style, but also just the style for that trip, right? You could plan two totally different trips depending on like the occasion. If you're doing like, let's say, a quick getaway to New York City for the weekend that's on a budget, that might be different than, let's say, going to celebrate your anniversary or an engagement or like your baby moon somewhere, right? They're like kind of two different vibes. So for us, for example, things that are important to us are, you know, having a hotel that's in like walkable distance from attractions if we don't have our car with us, and that has good reviews, but like it's not like the highest end hotel. We kind of like a good mid-range hotel. Same goes for flights, right? Like we don't typically pick the cheapest flight, because if you live in Canada or Ottawa or somewhere with a smaller airport, you know that it usually involves a really long layover. So we kind of do the mid-range flight, mid-range hotel, and then we typically just do some faster food or like sandwiches and stuff. So we don't love to spend a ton of money on food. We'd rather put that into our flights and hotel. And then entertainment, we kind of do 50-50. We love to find a lot of free things to do, and then also like inexpensive little hacks for like museums and stuff. So I think it's super important to, first of all, sit down when you're in the beginning stages of planning a trip. Like let's say, you know, your partner is like, hey, I really want to go to Boston for a weekend. Then you guys can sit down and you can kind of say, okay, where do we want to spend money? Where do we not really care to spend money? And, you know, what do we want to do? Is there a reason we're going on the trip, right? Like let's say you're going to a Red Sox game that's really expensive, you might spend less on your hotel, etc. So I think even for every trip, it's really important to sit down and discuss your travel style and where you want to spend money, because it's constantly changing. Obviously, the next is to figure out where you want to go. That's an important one. And then of course, like looking for flights, hotels, planning activities, which we're all gonna do. We're all gonna do as if like we're all like together, like a little big happy family when we book our little fake trip. Favorite thing to talk about is additional ways to save money on trips. Obviously, you know, you budget for a trip most times, right? And you have, you know, your budget you stick with so that you're not going into consumerism debt or spending a lot more money than you anticipate, and you have an idea of how much you can spend. But there's also just extra little ways that you can save money as well. So the first, which you guys know I'm a big fan of, is travel credit cards. I feel like you guys have a lot more in the US, but in Canada, I do really think if you travel at least once or twice a year, a travel credit card can be really worth it, even with an annual fee, because one, you get free checked bags, which that adds up pretty quick. For example, my credit card, Matt and I both each get a checked bag, which that's like $100 each way that we're getting for free. Obviously, a no-brainer is you get points for flights. I mean, Matt and I barely pay for our flights anymore, to be honest. And then of course things like lounge access. If you travel frequently, lounge access coming with your credit card actually saves you a ton of money, since food and beverages at the airport are so expensive. You can also book through websites like Rakuten, which I just want to also put a disclaimer that nothing in this video is sponsored unless I like say I have an affiliate with them, but this video is not sponsored by anybody. These are just websites that I know and love myself. Things like Expedia, I'm pretty sure you get 3% cash back if you just book through Rakuten, which things like Rakuten are awesome because you literally just click a link and then you get 3% cash back. You were gonna book the trip anyways, right? And then this is like kind of controversial because I feel like people hate marketing emails, but I actually love getting airline marketing emails, especially for like the low fare airlines. And obviously once again, it kind of comes down to your priorities, but Matt and I have had some really great experiences flying low fare airlines like Frontier. And so I actually love having their marketing emails on, because most times we'll be kind of thinking like, oh, we want to go on a trip for the next few months, and then we'll get like an email saying like, oh, $29 flights, and that kind of like gets the gears going to plan a trip. So might be controversial, but I actually love having marketing emails from flights. And then some random websites that I just wanted to mention that I really like and have used before. Hotel Tonight is a really great way to get last minute trips. Hotels will like post their rooms they have available like really cheap, usually like 50% off, like that they're trying to fill at the last minute. So if you're taking like maybe a last minute trip, or you have like a bunch of credit card points to use and you have the capacity and the flexibility to travel last minute like on a weekend, Hotel Tonight is a really great website. There's also Rumor, which I've never used Rumor myself, but I've heard a lot of great reviews. It's basically a website that has discounted hotel stays. It's kind of like a marketplace for hotel rooms for people who can't make the reservation, but it's non-refundable. So let's say you were like planning a trip and then your room's non-refundable and you couldn't go, you can post it on Rumor for a discounted price and people can take your reservation. I wanted to touch on how we save for trips, because I actually put a little question box up on my Instagram, just kind of wanting to know what you guys wanted out of this video. And a lot of you guys asked how we save for trips. So I'll kind of get into that a little bit more in the budget spreadsheet part of this video. But I say this in almost every finance video, but I feel like there's multiple right ways to do things. There are of course wrong ways, but there's always multiple right ways to do things. So this is just what works for us. I feel like there's two main ways that you can book a trip. You can work backwards or forwards. We personally like to work backwards when it comes to a trip. And what I mean by that is we will kind of scout out our flight, our hotel, our activities, etc. Kind of add it all up, and then that's kind of like how much we need to have saved. You could always work forwards in the sense that you could start with a specific budget you have in mind and then find things that accommodate that budget. Let's say you kind of wanted the challenge of like going to New York City for a weekend for $1,000 for 2 people. You could like kind of work around that budget and find like the cheapest flight, the cheapest hotel, etc. But what we do is we have like a general sense of our budget for a trip, but we will kind of start looking into hotels and flights, etc. See how much it's going to cost us and then build a budget from there. I did get a few questions asking if we like put it on a credit card and then pay it off after. That's how I got myself into consumerism debt growing up. So for me personally, I don't feel comfortable doing that, but we never put anything on a credit card that we couldn't pay off in full that month. I personally would not do that just because credit card interest rates are so high that I feel like putting a trip on a credit card and then just paying off chunks every month is just, I personally just wouldn't go on a trip I couldn't afford, but that is just our mentality. I had consumer debt for so long because I was just like traveling in university and like tapping my credit card. So for us personally, we're not comfortable doing that. I would try and avoid it as much as I could. But that brings me to my next point, which is to have a short-term savings account for travel. If you're someone who likes to book last minute trips or kind of have like a bit more of like an impulsive tendency to go on a trip, which is totally fine as long as you prepare yourself for it. So I did get questions about where our vacation money was stored. We just have it in a like bank savings account. Controversial again, but I think a TFSA should just be used for retirement and you shouldn't pull from it unless you absolutely have to. I know people put like their house savings in there and car savings and trip savings, and that's totally fine because you can pull from a TFSA, but I personally view a TFSA, why am I getting work emails on the weekend? I try and view a TFSA for retirement only, and I'd rather lose out on that little bit of interest and have the money accessible in my bank account. But once again, that just comes down to personal preference. These are really bothering me today. Yeah, for us, a short-term savings method works the best. So I just kind of am always putting a little bit of money into that vacation account. And then obviously when it comes time to book the trip, the great thing is that most times the only thing you need to pre-book is your flight. So typically if we're planning a trip, which I'll show you guys how we do that after, like I said, because we typically book our hotels through like Expedia and stuff, you don't pay until you get there. So I feel like the only thing you really need to have money for up front is like your flight. And that's why it's really nice to have a short-term savings account, because you can, you know, have some money in there, like let's say like $1,000 or $2,000 if you know you're gonna go on a trip this year. That way you can kind of book your flight whenever and not have to worry about like, oh, do I have the money to pay off my credit card, etc. You kind of have it in your account. And then obviously once the trip is over, we just start replenishing it again. I get questions too about like business versus personal travel. I follow the exact same process since most of our trips are classified as a business expense now, or a business trip. I follow the same process. If anything, I'm honestly a lot stricter when it comes to business trips, because when you're booking a trip on your personal side and you have like a steady paycheck from like your 9 to 5, you know that you'll be able to save for that trip. But something like content creation, you know, I haven't gotten paid in 7 weeks, so I have to be very, very strict and strategic when booking trips, because sometimes I just don't get paid for a few months at a time. Okay, and then I wanted to share just like a few like really random tips that I have for you guys that didn't like really fall into a category, and then I'll take you guys through the process of like planning a little fake trip. So the first is we don't really prioritize like fancy sit down meals. It's just like not our vibe. It's not what we prioritize spending money on. But one recommendation I have, if you're going somewhere touristy like New York City or like a big city, Boston, Chicago, is we try and not eat in super touristy areas because the cost seems to be a bit more expensive. So I think the rule of thumb is like walking 5 to 10 blocks away from the touristy area to find somewhere to eat. So, you know, walking a few blocks away from Times Square to find something to eat, or less touristy, more residential area to eat. So we found that going over to Brooklyn was a little bit cheaper than eating right in the city. Stuff like that. This is just a random tip that doesn't really apply to like saving money. I guess it's more like saving vacation time at work, but traveling on like federal holiday weekends, sometimes your flight will be a little bit more expensive, but you don't have to take as many vacation days off of work, which is like a fun tip, I guess. Seat Guru is a website I really recommend. It helps you pick out the comfiest seat on the plane. Please do not pay for your seat ahead of time, okay? I feel like that's the biggest scam the airlines do. It's like when you go to book your flight and they're like, you can book your seat now for $20, and I'm like, but you'll just do it for me free when I check in for the flight the day before. So I don't know, we like never pick our seats ahead of time at all, unless it's like a work trip, because then I can like if I'm going for my corporate job, I travel for my corporate job sometimes, and I will do it because like they'll pay for it. But yeah, I just never pick my seat ahead of time. I don't know, easy way to save like 40 bucks if you're traveling 2 people, let's say. All right, I'm sure there's some people watching this that are visual like me, so I thought it'd be really helpful if we planned like a little fake trip together so you guys could kind of see my process. And I feel like this is just an easier way to explain how we do our flights and our hotel. So let's say we want to go to Boston for a weekend. We're gonna go from Friday to Monday. One of my biggest tips is, if you have a job that allows you to do so, is being flexible on your travel dates. I know this is not possible for all jobs, like teachers, etc., who maybe don't get a ton of time off during the school year, but being flexible on your travel dates can save you a lot of money. And that is where Matt and I start, is we typically will look and see when it's the cheapest to fly, and then we will request our time off and we will plan our trip around whenever it's cheapest to fly. We don't really ever go into a trip with like specific dates in mind, unless it's like an anniversary trip or something. We'll typically look, see when flights are the cheapest and be like, yeah, we're okay. We pretty much exclusively book flights or look for flights through Google Flights. 1, you can set alerts to get the cheapest price. 2, you can see different airlines all at once. And 3, you can see the cheapest time to fly within like a month or 2 window, and I'll show you guys how to do it. So like I said, let's pretend we're gonna go to Boston. So we're gonna type in Boston, and we're gonna put, obviously, I'll just do one person for now to make it easier. We're gonna click search, and we're gonna go like this. And let's say we usually have like a month in mind. So let's say we want to go in August or September. The great thing about Google Calendar is you can see the different prices for different days. Now this is just the cheapest flight, however, so it might include a really long layover. But as you guys can see, the flights are relatively the same for most of these days. $397, $418. I obviously wouldn't travel on this day because it's $471. Let's look at September. $397, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's say we are going to travel, let's do the 15th to the 18th, for example, $397. And like I said here, you can also track your prices, which is really great, and you can switch on any dates. Boston's not really a great example because there's usually a really long layover, but as you guys can see here, it pulls the cheapest flights for you guys with different airlines. Now, if you're someone like us who has a travel credit card, you have to weigh the pros and cons of flying a different airline for cheap or using your credit card points. So Porter is the cheapest flight. And oh, I love that you can fly nonstop. We kind of weigh the pros and cons, right? Like, okay, yes, using our Air Canada credit card would get us a lot of points, but let's put us in a situation where we don't have any points to redeem. We would factor in probably a few different flights. So we would factor in this one, right? But keep in mind there's a 3-hour layover and it's actually $8 more expensive than the cheaper flight that's nonstop. So we would probably pick this flight. And this is obviously assuming we don't have any credit card points to use. So we do take into account layovers since we do fly out of Ottawa, which is a really small, tiny, shitty airport. So now that we found an affordable flight, I always look for our hotels on Expedia, which I feel like Expedia is like really hit or miss for people. I personally really like it, but I know like some people just don't really like it. And obviously if you have a credit card that is attached to a hotel like the Marriott Bonvoy Amex, you might book directly through Marriott. I also think it's worthwhile maybe posting on your Instagram or asking any friends that you know what locations are best to stay in when you're visiting a new city, of course, and factor in like, do you want a rental car or not? Because yes, it might be a little bit cheaper to stay outside of the city, but if you have to rent a rental car, is that going to end up being the same price as just staying in the city and having a walkable hotel? I think hotels too specifically are something to talk about when you're traveling with your partner. For example, Matt and I will pay a little bit more to have a hotel that is very central because we like to come back and take breaks throughout the day because we like to walk a lot of places. So let's type in Boston for our like little fake trip. And what days were we going again? The 15th to the 18th. It's really great too because Expedia has a map view. So if you wanted to look at where these hotels were in terms of like location in the city you're traveling to, that's super helpful. So I typically will just scan the page first, always sort by recommended, not price low to high, and I'll just scan the page and see what the like approximate cost is. Like kind of seems like the $300 to $500 range is pretty typical for downtown Boston. I also love too that you get the total price here because while you might think like, oh my gosh, $500 is not that bad, when you times that by like 3 or 4 nights that you're staying, it adds up really quick. I also don't know why I'm not signed in right now, but I do recommend having an Expedia account because you sometimes will get a discount. Then I'll typically open a few different hotels that I might be interested in that are kind of in our price range or that we'd be like kind of comfortable spending. And the really great thing about Expedia that I love is it'll tell you what's close to you in the area. So if you're trying to do touristy stuff, which I really, really love. So, and it shows you a little map here too. So I really like this Hilton. And like I mentioned before, the great thing about Expedia is that you can book it and then pay there so you have the time to save the money. Okay, so let's say we decided to book the Yotel Boston. Then I would go down and see how much the price was, and then I typically will call the hotel and try and book directly through them because more times than not, if you say, hi there, would you price match Expedia? They normally say yes because they don't want to pay the commission to Expedia. So I'll typically just call and say, hi there, like Expedia has a room for $353 a night. Would you be able to price match that so I could book directly through you? And sometimes it has happened to me occasionally where they'll actually give me a cheaper price, like a little bit of a discount. So I think it's always worth calling the hotel and seeing if they'll price match and you can book directly through them. Next thing that I do is plan out activities. For food, we just have like a general budget, kind of like a weekly budget, like when you're at home, since I kind of know how much we spend on food since we don't really go to fancy restaurants or anything. But when it comes to activities, that is something that we enjoy spending our money on, and we would rather stay in like a little bit of a cheaper hotel and spend more money on activities. So obviously if it's our first time going to Boston, we probably want to do museums and stuff. So I always look up things to do in Boston, and then I will open the TripAdvisor. I love TripAdvisor. It's so great. And I usually will have like a Notion page, like a itinerary for the trip open as well, so I can kind of plan our trip at the same time. But I'll basically just scroll through and see what there is to do, top attractions, etc. You could also use something like Groupon to get like discounted, I don't know, like cruises, sightseeing tours, etc. And one thing we do, or like a rule of thumb I try and have, is half free things to do and half paid things to do. Matt and I are very simple when we travel, and we honestly really could just roam a city, go to coffee shops, bookstores, thrift stores, etc., and like not pay to do anything. We just are very simple people when we travel. but it is of course fun to do attractions and whatnot. So I definitely think it just depends on the kind of people you are. Perhaps you're sports people who want to go see, like I said, a game when you're there. And in that case, you might prioritize paying for that and like going to Fenway Park. Whereas for us, we're like pretty content just like walking around browsing stores. So I'll typically write down fun free things I want to do, like the Freedom Trail, the Boston Public Garden. I know that there's a library there, the Boston Public Library, etc. When it comes to museums and things we want to do, let's say we want to go to the JFK Museum, which I actually kind of want to go there because I'm a huge like JFK nerd. We will go to the website, either buy them there or closer to the date. I feel like when we traveled during the pandemic, we had to do a lot ahead of time, but now things are pretty like relaxed. So you could buy it now if you like had the means to do so. Like I said, if you had a short-term savings account set up for travel, but we usually do one adult and one student because I have a student ID for school. And then it'll obviously say like $30 here, and I would either like check out now to reserve our spot, or I would kind of plug that into my budget. And that's how we kind of plan hotel, flights, and activities. And then I would kind of go through that process, build an itinerary, and kind of space out the paid activities. As much as I try and stay off of TikTok, I do really think that TikTok can be a really great tool when it comes to planning trips, especially like New York City, Boston, big cities like that. Because when we went to New York City, I would just look up like free or discounted things to do in New York City, and there's so many TikToks. Same goes for restaurants and coffee shops. We will take recommendations from people usually like on Instagram for coffee and food, but like I said, we don't really spend a lot on food, so it's pretty easy to gauge our like daily budget. And another thing to keep in mind is that while it seems that we might be like strict when we travel, like by having a budget spreadsheet, the one category we're not strict in is food. And I know it's kind of ironic because we budget for trips, but we are really big homebodies, and when we're at home, we don't really eat out a lot. We eat out once a week, and we usually do like take-in or takeout or like Uber Eats, to not eat out a ton when we're at home and save that for travel. So that's kind of the one category, and yours might be like entertainment or maybe shopping or something. But for us, the one category that we don't really have a budget for, but we're just like very intuitive and aware of how much we're spending, is food. And that's just because when we're at home, we don't spend a lot on takeout, so our trips kind of feel like a treat for us. And we have for food as well is we will typically do like a little bit of a grocery run if we're there for a few days, and grab like granola bars, and I don't know, Matt usually gets like apples or something so that we can have snacks, because I feel like snacks are really pricey on trips, especially if you're flying somewhere and not driving. So yeah, one of my tips is to hit up a grocery store and buy some snacks, maybe even like some kombuchas or even like seltzers or something to have, because I feel like drinks at restaurants are so expensive. So that's another tip that we do as well. We even do that when we go to Disney, just like buy some snacks and bring them with us, because snacks really add up. I always get like so nervous that like I'm forgetting a really good tip when I film these videos. Yeah, that's like the one category, and I feel like everyone is gonna have a different category where they kind of like indulge a bit more. And you can indulge while still being intuitive with your money and aware of your spending. It doesn't mean going buck wild, it just means you're giving yourself the flexibility to treat yourself a little bit more. And for us, we like to do that with eating out. The last thing I'm gonna do with you guys is share my kind of travel budget spreadsheet, just to give you guys an idea. I'm sure there's a ton of like great apps and other things out there that you can use to track your spending. But I actually purchased, if you guys watch my videos, I purchased a annual budget, and sadly I can't share what I'm about to show you guys because I tweaked the budget that I bought. So like technically it's for like I just can't share that. I just don't think that would be right. But feel free to like take a screenshot or even adjust your own budget to create a travel page. I just took one of the monthly layouts, I duplicated it, and then I kind of tweaked it for travel. So feel free to take a screenshot and kind of set it up as your own, but I sadly obviously can't share this because it technically is a budget template that I bought, and then I kind of customized it to myself. But it'll give you guys an idea of how we budget for our trip. So I'm going to show you the budget that we have for our Disney trip, because it's a real budget that we have set up, and hopefully that is a little bit helpful. The budget spreadsheet looks pretty similar to my monthly budget if you guys watch those videos. But basically this is how we just track our like saving / spending on trips, just to give us a general idea. You guys know I am not like a down to the dollar budgeter anymore. I'm more of like an intuitive budgeter, and it's just nice to kind of be aware of like approximately how much a trip is going to cost us, especially if we have short-term savings for the trip. Like let's say the trip is going to cost $3,000, but we only have $2,000 saved. We know that we'll have to save another $1,000 by the time we go on the trip. But our main method of saving money is just through short-term savings. So for example, for our Disney trip, I could like probably get into this in a whole nother video, but it's a little bit different when it comes to business versus personal trips. But like I said, if anything, I think I'm a little bit more strict when it comes to business trips, because obviously sometimes you just don't get paid for weeks on end. So that's like a whole different video I could go into, is like business trips and write-offs and all that kind of stuff, which I feel like you guys like, because every time I talk about them you want to see more. But let's just pretend this trip is not a business trip. So let's say for this trip we have $2,000 in short-term savings set aside for the trip. This is pretty much Disney exclusive to have gift cards, but it's a really great way if you are just like learning to budget, especially a trip like Disney where it's just like very overwhelming and easy to spend a lot of money. Having gift cards is a really great way to do it. And you guys will see here, we specifically use our gift cards for souvenirs. It's just like a great way to keep us on track, because that is the one category I feel like I can get a little spendy in. So it's nice to have a set amount on a gift card. When it's out, and it really forces me to be very selective with my souvenirs. I feel like that's even high. It's just because we have some gift cards from Christmas. And if you guys are Disney people like us, or you're traveling soon, we typically will just ask for Disney gift cards for like Christmas, birthdays, holidays, etc. from like friends and family. And that's a really great way to save for your trip as well, like some bonus money. And then I get asked a lot how we split our trips, and basically because most of our trips are business, they have to obviously go through like my business credit card and stuff. And so I will put everything on my credit card, and then at the end of the trip, Matt will just like send me half of it. So typically I have a line here for Matt's transfer, which depends on the price of the trip. Let's just say for this trip, let's just say it's like $800. I have no idea. We would typically first, like we wouldn't really fill this part in. We would fill all of this in. Like I said, we like to work backwards and see how much it's going to cost us and see how much we have like left to save. For Disney, we actually have paid for some stuff already, so I can share this with you guys. So we would budget our flight, our Uber. Disney, you do hotel deposits and then the rest of it. So that's why we have it broken down into 2 categories. Coffee shops, not really. I guess you could just put coffee, food, park tickets, and then because I have this template for like general trips, it has some Disney stuff and some non-Disney stuff. Like obviously you're not going to a museum at Disney, but you're buying park tickets, and then souvenirs. This is really nice here. It's just like a little thing of things we have to do. I just like that it's all in the same spot. So for example, I actually just booked that, so I can scratch that off and I can scratch that off. This is typically where we start. I feel like I'm working backwards here, but this is at the beginning of a trip when we were just talking about booking our fake trip and talking about like, you know, figuring out different flights and hotel options and whatnot. I will typically do the research, and then I'll sit down with Matt and just say, okay, here are our 3 options. So we can fly Air Canada, but we have a 4-hour layover. We could fly WestJet for $100 more and it's a direct flight, or we could save $400 and fly Frontier, but it's out of Syracuse, so we have to factor in gas and parking. Same thing goes for hotel options, right? I'll just write down some different options here, and we'll kind of decide for that trip specifically what we want to spend, because like I said, every trip is different. And then same goes for activity and entertainment. So this is a really great spot to kind of like brainstorm a trip, and then you can obviously add them all together. You can like sum them up here and then put them in your budget category. And then this is just where we track our expenses. So I'll show you guys like kind of an example of working backwards. So let's say flight is $800, hotel's $1,000, hotel deposit was $350, Ubers, let's say we plan on spending, we can typically stick to about $100 a day. So we'll just give ourselves some wiggle room. I mean, Disney's expensive, so let's just say $500 for food. Our park tickets were paid for by Disney. They're inviting us out, they're hosting us, which is so exciting. So when you add all of this up, you get to about, oh, ironically, we actually got to $3,000 on the dot. That's kind of funny. So we know that between our savings, gift cards, and what we have to save up until the trip, it needs to be around $3,000. Keep in mind, the only thing you really pay up front for Disney is a flight and a hotel deposit. So that's really all we had to have up front was the $800 and $350. But let's say we have, okay, we have $1,500 in our savings and we have $250 in gift cards. Let's say he gave me, I don't know, half the money for the flight. We would know that by the time we go on the trip, we need to have another $850 saved. So it's nice that it kind of formulates that for you. And that's typically how we plan our trips, right? We'll take what we have in our savings, we'll take what we have in gift cards, and then we will each say, okay, we need to have $850 saved by the time we go on this trip. Split that in half, that's $425 each. And then by the time we go on the trip, we'll have that money. So that's kind of how we do the budget for the trip. And with that being said, that is how we create a budget, stick to a budget, and kind of set up a trip and budget for it. How many times can I say travel, trip, and budget in this video? But I hope you guys enjoyed. Like I said, this was a video I hadn't really seen much of online, and I thought it'd be really fun to talk about since I love personal finance and I love travel. So I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. It lets YouTube know that you enjoyed it, and it lets more people see my video. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I post 3 videos a week all about lifestyle, like I said, getting through your 20s and personal finance and resetting and all that fun stuff. And I would love it if you joined our community. If you have any questions that I didn't address, leave them down below or DM me on Instagram. I answer all of my comments and DMs and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, if you guys want to see maybe like a little work day in my life talking about business and how we book business trips and how that works, let me know. I would love to film that for you guys. But I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.